Good evening. Welcome to the first annual Atlas Shrugged Crony Awards. I wanted to start tonight with a joke, so I went on to Google, and unfortunately I made a spelling error. So the joke is corn subsidies in the United States totaled $84.4 billion from 1995 to 2012. All right, there we go. All right, there we go. So I think almost everyone in this room has been profoundly impacted by the introduction of objectivism into their lives. After reading Atlas Shrugged at 16, my life was changed forever. Armed with the force of reason, I realized that I truly am the entrepreneur of my own life. Until I personally encountered Health and Human Services, the Department of Justice, and had to deal with the unintended consequences of Dodd-Frank. But put in computer terms, I view objectivism as the operating system for liberty. Sadly, most people aren't yet aware that computers exist. Case in point, a study by the US Department of Education shows that only 25% of, apparently including me, college graduates were proficiently literate, that is, using printed and written information in society to achieve one's goals and develop one's knowledge and potential. So that's a pretty alarming statistic. So it goes on, and I'm going to go through all the details, but it assesses three types of literacy: prose literacy, which is the ability to comprehend continuous text, like newspaper articles and the brochure that comes with a new microwave; document literacy, and the ability to understand and use documents to perform tasks. Based on their scores, participants in the survey were deemed to have basic, intermediate, or proficient literacy. The summary and the conclusion of this analysis is, today nearly a quarter of Americans have a university degree by the time they're 25, and these college-educated dummies are confused by nearly everything they read. So while we may debate about the perils of postmodernism or the influence of Rawls, the fact is the majority of college grads can't figure out how to microwave a bag of popcorn. Cronyism is a huge theme in Atlas Shrugged. We can all too clearly picture the Jim Taggarts and Oren Boyles in our daily reality. And while some would argue that there are many groups that tackle the cause of promoting capitalism, there's an important point to consider. There's a difference between an organization having a mission and then being able to execute on that mission. I'm not saying that the groups out there that are promoting capitalism aren't doing a good job, but the United States has an annual budget of approximately $4 trillion, with a significant portion of that money going to fund welfare and other collectivist programs that are directly in contrast to our worldview. Oh, and the kicker is, it's our money taken by force that's fueling these programs. The defense of capitalism needs all the help it can get. We need to engage people in a fundamental way that highlights the differences between cronyism and free market capitalism. This is why we introduced the Crony Awards. Before I go into the contest itself, I want to introduce the team that made it possible. In addition to myself, Ed Hudgens has been involved in the project. David Kelly, George Johnson, Lauren Rumpler, and we have a fantastic advisory board, including Fred Smith, who is the founder of CEI, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, Tim Carney, who's a senior political columnist from the Washington Examiner, Stephen Hicks, who is the executive director for the Center of Ethics and Entrepreneurship, who's here, and lastly, Nick Sorrentino, who is tonight's keynote speaker. Nick is the co-founder and editor of AgainstCronyCapitalism.org and the CEO of Accelerix Consultants. In 2011, he founded Against Crony Capitalism with Hunter Lewis, the founder and former CEO of Cambridge Associates, a worldwide investment firm, with the goal of highlighting the increasing levels of crony capitalism in the US economy and abroad. Currently, Against Crony Capitalism averages 300,000 to 400,000 unique visitors a month, and its readership has more than doubled year over year for 4 years. In 2008, Mr. Sorrentino also founded Excelorix Consultants, which helps businesses and nonprofits make sense of social media and big data. His clients have spanned the spectrum from mom and pop organizations to large insurance companies. He's spoken at CPAC, the Commit Forum, and many other venues. His work has been featured at Breitbart, Reason.com, NPR, Town Hall, The Daily Caller, Chief Executive Magazine, and other publications. A graduate of Murray Washington College, he lives just outside Washington, D.C., where he can keep an eye on the Leviathan. So with that said, it's my pleasure to introduce Nick Sorrentino.
Everybody hear me okay? Yes. Well, first, thank you very much to Aaron for that wonderful introduction. I also want to say a special thanks to Ed Hudgens, who is a fellow advocate of liberty and a denizen of Washington, kind of like me, only he lives there, and I only come in twice a month. And thank you to the Atlas Society for having me speak. I'm honored, truly, and I appreciate the opportunity. And I've really enjoyed meeting all of you. Now, the title of my talk is The Age of Crony Capitalism and Liberty as a Light App, or Light Application, as in on your smartphone. All right. I figured since I was addressing a group of objectivists on the topic of crony capitalism, I should probably start with a quote from Ayn Rand. I know that no one does this at these sorts of things, but I'm going to do it anyway. And she says, "Government help to business is just as disastrous as government persecution. The only way a government can be of service to national prosperity is by keeping its hands off." Amen, right? Well, I guess amen to Ayn Rand, right? Oh, whatever. Anyway, boy, is that ever true. You know it, I know it. A relatively large minority of the American people are coming to understand it. Yet government help to business only seems to grow with each passing year. Crony capitalism only appears to increase. Indeed, our economy is now a crony economic system. I hate to say it, but it's true. It has been for a long time, but it has gotten worse since the turn of the century. And it is now fully fledged, although it can still fledge more, I think. Government is everywhere in our lives, in our food, our air, our cars, our bank accounts, our schools, of course online, and pretty much everywhere else. Our government has partnered with corporations, unions, all sorts of other interests to reach into the nooks and crannies of our lives. Now, sometimes this partnership is coerced by government. Sometimes industry seeks a government sponsor. But either way, in any crony arrangement, it soon degenerates into a situation where bureaucrats and business people collude and game the system in the interest of power, fat or bottom lines of various kinds, or both at the expense of the taxpayer. This is the world we live in today, and it is frankly a dangerous time for lovers of liberty, free prices, and the free market. Now, I promise, I'm going to start off kind of like dour, and it gets better at the end, so, you know. We have a wide array of readers against crony capitalism, I'd say, and there's nothing scientific about this estimate, that about 30% of our readers would identify as libertarian, at least in the political sense. Another 50% would be conservatives of various kinds, and the balance are liberals, progressives, so I lump the two together, although there is a difference. And we pride ourselves on welcoming anyone to the conversation who is respectful of the site and other readers, which I appreciated your discussion of open objectivism yesterday, because we feel the same way. You know, let's hold those ideas up to the flame and see if they burn off or not, right? So, so as you can imagine, we have very spirited debates with that group of people. One of the debates that always comes up and resurfaces over and over is whether the problem is industry buying government or whether the real problem is government co-opting business. People go round and round on this every day. But I see our system, our current economic age, as an elaborate dance. Sometimes government leads, sometimes business and other special interests lead. But in the end, it is government which gets to call the tune because it has the guns. This should never be forgotten. The state is built upon the principle of force. If the state really wants something of yours, it, in many cases, especially now, could just take it. Income, inheritance, real estate, your livelihood, though draped in the cloak of democracy, in the USA anyway, the force wielded by the modern state is not that different from the force wielded by the lord or king of old. If anything, because our government is so ubiquitous, the force at times is even greater than in the days of old, though typically more subtle. And the force of the state is still wielded for the benefit of those connected to the state. Not really an aristocracy, but more of a political class. This political class is relatively large. It consists of the millions of government employees, federal, state, local, public school teachers, largely, those who are dependent on the state directly for whatever reason, often through no fault of their own. Professors who make their living advocating for state planning of various sorts, the lobby class, which exists to game the state for their clients, perhaps the most destructive subgroup, statist business people. The people who live off the taxpayer but use the private sector as a conduit. But this last group is the most destructive, arguably, because they undermine the capitalist free market, free price system the most. Those who are not connected to the crony state look around and see bankers getting bailouts, defense contractors being paid millions, farmers farming subsidies instead of crops, and say, look, that's capitalism for you. The fat cat's getting fatter. And yet, still, for all of the buying of politicians that goes on by industry and unions, and much of it does go on, in the end, most of the force still lay with the state. A friend of mine, a longtime libertarian, is fond of saying that parasites typically don't kill their hosts. That government is likely to allow just enough freedom in the private sector to keep the state well fed. It's very hard to tax an economy which is dead. Soon the parasites are dead too. But just because parasites tend not to kill their hosts doesn't mean that they never kill their hosts. In fact, nature's full of such parasites. Most of these little creatures are too gruesome to identify here, although it looks like everybody is mostly done with their food for the most part. But suffice it to say, they exist. And I do have to say, there is, as I was looking into this, there are a couple of types of wasps in Central America that apparently burrow into their hosts and take over their brains and make them commit suicide. How insane is that? But anyway, that's completely aside. Okay. Yeah, I was trying to find a joke in there. I could not find one. Anyway, so I fear we're dealing with a lethal parasite in government. The trajectory currently is for ever more cronyism, ever more blood and energy extracted from the private sector, and it seems like the state can't help itself, even if it wanted to. Indeed, in many parts of the country, cronyism is already killing, and not just co-opting the private sector, and by extension, the real economy. For instance, in March of this year, the Washington Times had an interesting article on this phenomenon entitled, "Blue State Businesses on the Endangered Species List." Very interesting. And this, as the state increases in size, some parts of the American economy are being sucked dry. Now, it's primarily small, unconnected businesses, but in time, it will be the big ones too. Even those that think they have partnered up with the state and as such have bought themselves protection and or subsidized profits. but make a deal with the devil or a parasite and see what happens. By the way, I hate the whole blue state, red state stuff, nonsense. Cuba and North Korea are red states, not Texas. And the color blue is traditionally conservative color, not one associated with the left. For some reason, the colors, and this is true, the networks designated as indicating whether a state voted for one party or the other flipped in 1992 with the election of Bill Clinton, just for your information. That aside. One of the most shared posts over the past couple of months against crony capitalism was on the widespread closing of Seattle eateries due to the graduated increase of the minimum wage in the city to $15 an hour. It's an important story because it illustrates the insanity of the status and crony thinking. Raise the minimum wage to too far above the real wage level. Extract just a bit more blood from entrepreneurs in an effort to negate the price mechanism for wages. And watch margins erode or disappear along with businesses and jobs. And that's what we're seeing already in Seattle. Additionally, the cost of food in the remaining restaurants, because some restaurants will survive, the cost of the food there will go up. It becomes truly a luxury item for the grown-up hipsters who populate the city center. And there are lots of those in Seattle, at least the nice part of the city center. Meanwhile, low-skilled workers must move out of the city to make ends meet. Strains are put on families and so on. It's a potential disaster with far-reaching effects. But the city wants higher wages because it's the fair thing to do. A living wage, right? Living wage, yeah. Of course, that unions want higher wages because their contracts are based off of the minimum wage as a cost basis has nothing to do with it, of course. It's all in the name of fairness. Pretty fair, especially for the folks trying to make it as restaurateurs. Hard enough way to make a living without having to pay the dishwasher $15 an hour. In fact, according to the Washington Restaurant Association's Anthony Anton, and as reported by Swift Washington, Anton estimates that a common budget breakdown among sustaining Seattle restaurants so far has been the following. 36% of funds are devoted to labor, 30% to food costs, and 30% go to everything else, all under operational costs. The remaining 4% has been left for profit margin, and as a result, in a $700,000 restaurant, he estimates that the average restaurateur in Seattle has been making $28,000 a year. In Seattle. $28,000 a year in the city of Seattle. Doesn't sound like most of these restaurateurs are living too high on the hog. In fact, with a $15 an hour minimum wage, the dishwasher may actually be better off. And this is without factoring the hassle of insurance, inspection shakedowns, payroll, and all the other things that go with running a restaurant. Tell me how this is supposed to work. $28,000 a year. This is an example of what I call magic pony economics, inspired by My Little Pony. My girls watch it all the time. I'm telling you, that's the world that most people live in. There are many people who simply do not understand the concept of supply and demand. They've been taught about fairness since the day they wandered into kindergarten. But this has proven highly unfortunate for our American society. And I'm all for fair play. I often get annoyed when I perceive something as not being fair. But life very often is not fair. We all know that. That's the way it is. And like it or not, the law of supply and demand is reality. It's like gravity. One could even make the case that markets represent a form of the Tao, the way of the universe, ebb and flow, like the seasons and the tides. And that's how I see it. One can either acknowledge this reality, this flow, or one can alternatively run one city, town, or state into the ground, which appears to be the current trend in some parts of America. And that's just a colossal shame. The parasite is killing the host. But death for business in general is still pretty far off with current trends in place. Indeed, some businesses have flourished at the expense of the taxpayer and the consumer under the current system. And the list is long. GM, GE, Berkshire Hathaway, Boeing, Caterpillar, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Citibank, the health insurance companies, the hospital companies, CVS, the military-industrial complex, the university system, all of these guys have been winners to date in the crony economy, and there are many more. But the economy as a whole, the country as a whole, is worse off. Because as these companies secure taxpayers' subsidized revenue streams while carving regulatory moats around themselves, the rest of us, consumers, entrepreneurs, are shut out of the economy even while being bled dry of what economic power we do still have. This is a natural tendency, of course. Cronyism has probably been around since the days of Hammurabi, and even before that. But the scale of crony capitalism now is so large, it threatens our economy and our way of life. That is, a life in which the state is not the sun around which everything revolves. Most of us in this room cling to that life, but the growing crony state makes this harder and harder. To be clear, again, crony capitalism is not just the co-opting of business by government, or to a lesser but still very significant extent, the co-opting of government by business. Other groups are involved, other special interests. Cronyism is pervasive. It is in every part of the American economy. They are connected, and there are the connected and there are the disconnected. And the crony system is making the game of commerce much harder to play for the disconnected, the non-cronies. I like 3 games. I play lots of games, but I like 3. I figured this out. Business, golf, and poker. I'm reasonably good at Scrabble, but I don't enjoy it. I usually get roped into it. One time a year is about enough for me after Thanksgiving. Poker, however, I find endlessly fascinating, though I don't have time to play it much anymore. There was a time when I did. As Kenny Rogers says, know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em, when to walk away and when to run. Though I would say that if you ever find yourself running away from a poker game, it's probably time to consider another pastime. Poker, real poker, is a great analogy for life. Some of us come to the table with big stacks. Some of us come to the table with small stacks. Big, tall stacks are a huge advantage. Small stacks are harder to work with. For instance, if one has a big stack and one plays one's cards right, with a good hand, the payoff can be large, can be huge. With a smaller stack, the payoff can only be the size of your current stack, assuming a one-on-one showdown. Some consider this unfair. Some believe that everyone should start with an even stack. There's a pretty good case to be made for this, particularly if one is playing in a tournament. If, however, one is playing what is called a cash game, which is more like life, where players come in and go out with each hand, and the goal is more to win an individual hand than an entire tournament, players with large stacks are actually opportunities for those with short stacks. In a cash game, a big stack player is more likely to bet big on a weaker hand. If a short stack player is patient and skilled, the less disciplined, often, big stack is where the next month's rent might come from. I'm telling you, I know this, okay? The short stack is hungrier than the big stack, and this can be an advantage if a short stack player is disciplined and skilled. This is what a free market capitalist system is like. Players come and go. Big stacks, short stacks. Some take their shot and miss. Others take their shot and win. There's some gambling, but more skill. And in most instances, there's always another game to be had. However, in a crony capitalist system, the game is rigged. The tall stack guys have a deal with the casino. In some cases, the friends of the casino, who are already rich, get to see some of the cards that the unconnected short stacks don't get to see. In other cases, the casino replenishes the stacks of the formerly tall stacks because the formerly tall stacks are friends of the casino. This is what happened with the bank bailouts. I mean, that's exactly what happened with the bank bailouts. Still, other times the casino won't even let the short stacks play, even with every advantage already going to the tall stacks. Cheating is a bad way to win. It's immoral. It just shows, if only to oneself, that one is not the best at the table. Some people, cheats, people who have no problem harming other people, are okay with this. For them, the money is the only end. Dirty or not, it spends the same. For others, though, the only stack worth having is one which is won in a clean game. He or she doesn't need the largesse of the casino to win because he or she is just flat out good. Same thing in business. Some business people don't mind playing the crony game. Dirty money spends the same. Others, however, want to play a straight up and clean game because they know that a clean game is the game in which a skilled and disciplined business person has the best chance. That and the whole honor thing. A relatively clean, non-crony economy is to the advantage of the skilled, the disciplined, the innovators, the value creators, consumers, pretty much everyone but the cronies. But this need not remain the case. Indeed, it must not. The good news, and there is much, is that technology is on our side. The great weakness of the state is its sheer size. It's slow to move, takes forever to innovate. We live, however, in an increasingly dynamic economy and world in general. In January 2009, I founded my company, Accelerix, which consisted of myself, and still consists only of myself, which focused on helping businesses use social media effectively. It seems obvious that a business, any business, should be involved seriously with social media. It's how ideas are transferred to a large extent. It's how trends are identified. Social media is where much of the real business of business is done. Almost everyone recognizes this now. But as recently as 2010, 5 years ago, heck, in some cases 3 years ago, business people, especially senior people in organizations, did not understand this. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. For the first couple of years of my business, I did a lot of evangelizing. But then the lights switched on in the marketplace, thankfully. All of a sudden, people saw the power of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, and the rest. Suddenly, new vistas opened up, and they opened up in the darkest days of the Great Recession. We have witnessed a revolution within the information revolution with social media. And it is an ongoing revolution within the ongoing larger information revolution. Now, did government come up with social media? Did some bureaucrat think it was a good idea for the great unwashed to be able to communicate with each other at almost no cost and virtually instantly? In short, hell no. The last thing government wants and the crony system wants is informed and powerful economic actors and an informed citizenry. In 2013, current Secretary of State John Kerry said this while speaking in Brasilia, one of the great crony capitals of the world. This little thing called the internet makes it much harder to govern. Yeah. Interesting statement, and he's fundamentally wrong. It doesn't make it harder to govern. In fact, the internet makes it much easier to govern. It's easier to communicate today with constituents effectively and in a time-efficient manner. The internet, however, does make it much harder to dictate, to rule. And that annoys people like Kerry, one can imagine, to no end. And I, for one, am deeply happy that it does. Though the crony system has grown and continues to grow, clearly we can take heart. The state and the crony system is languid, it is heavy, it is self-satisfied, it is arrogant, and thankfully for us, lovers of liberty, languid, heavy, self-satisfied, arrogant people and systems usually lack much in the way of vision. We, objectivists, libertarians, even some conservatives, do, however, have vision. In addition to this vision, we have a solution which works way better than 20th century statism. It's 21st century capitalism, free market capitalism, liberty. Liberty is the spirit of capitalism. There is no liberty without economic liberty. A truly capitalist system is an open source economic system. Write good code. Now I know not many of you guys are probably programmers, and I'm certainly not one either. But if you write good code, you come up with a good idea. All right? You put it out to the world, you make money with that idea. Good. The world's better, we move on. Liberty is a light app on one's smartphone. Statism and its sister cronyism are consoles with green screens and floppy drives. Liberty, open source economics, is just a better solution. It's a better app. It works. Make money, reinvest that money with the next group of innovators. Create wealth, not money, not shuffled money, but real wealth. With this wealth comes a higher standard of living for all. True, it's not an even rise, but what in nature grows evenly? Nothing. However, in free market capitalism, the tendency is toward growth and the bearing of fruit. And this benefits society at large while also benefiting the individual willing to innovate, think strategically, and fundamentally to work. Cronies will always be with us to some extent. There will always be people looking to scam the system and the taxpayer, at least as long as we are compelled to pay taxes. But the primary vehicle for cronies, the catalyst which makes crony capitalism possible, the state, looks increasingly antiquated these days. It may not be obvious yet, particularly as Leviathan continues to expand, but that's the nature of important changes in human history. They aren't obvious to most people until the changes actually happen. And then there are the people who make the change happen. Be one of those people. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nick. Excellent job. I usually see Nick at least every month at a meeting with Fred Smith and so forth, where we talk about these things, and occasionally at a Wednesday morning meeting. By the way, since you mentioned, I guess most people are finished with their food, so you were talking about a particular wasp that gets into a brain. Yeah. Well, Daniel Dennett, in one of his books called, I think it's Breaking the Spell, yeah, starts off with a story like that. And he talks about ants that seem to be acting crazy, and they basically climb up grass, they just kind of frenetically do that, and they end up getting eaten by cows disproportionately. Why do they do that? What's the deal there? Well, it turns out that there's a thing called a fluke that gets into the brain of an ant and causes them to do this, and the fluke can only survive in the stomach of the cow. So the evolution has produced this little fluke that gets into the brain of an ant. The ants kind of go crazy. They keep climbing up pieces of grass. They end up in the stomach of a cow, and the fluke basically survives there. If you think of the cow as crony capitalists, I know that there's an analogy in there somewhere, and we'll work on that one. Nick mentioned the minimum wage situation in Seattle. There was another story I read, maybe some of you read it. Steve Nahm probably knows about this one. Out in San Francisco, there's a science fiction bookstore that's been around for decades. I can't remember the name of the store. I'm a big sci-fi fan. And of course, it's in downtown San Francisco, and they're all good, hardcore liberals, as they should be. And when they passed the $15 minimum wage, which many of these folks supported apparently, they started to look at their bottom line and go, wow, we don't work on a big profit margin. Most of us, a lot of us are, just kind of there because of the fun of it. And we're looking at the minimum wage increase here, and we literally are going to start losing $18,000 or $20,000 a year, and we just can't do it. So after something like 40 or 50 years, we're going to have to shut down the science fiction bookstore, major, and it's shut down. So, I guess they can feel good about voting virtuously, but guess what? None of them are working anymore. And sci-fi fans in San Francisco don't have that bookstore anymore. Well, the crony capitalism concept, of course, is one that we all in this room know. We know that the statists have a vested interest in making sure that there's confusion between real free marketeers, real business people who produce goods and services to sell to willing customers, versus the cronies. They can denounce the cronies and they can say, well, see, all businesses are like that. Though the curious thing, in fact, the morally bizarre thing, is that these same politicians, especially the Hillary Clintons and the Elizabeth Warrens, who denounce cronies and so forth, are the ones who are raking in the money. Elizabeth Warren, great, champion, darling of the left, supports the Export-Import Bank, something that many of us are, of course, against as a crony system. The Atlas Society has not been satisfied with just making these points, as important as it is to educate people about the difference between real business people who produce goods and services and the cronies. We weren't satisfied with just doing that. We wanted to say, is there something else we can do? Academic seminars are nice, but we wanted to do something in addition to that. And so we came up with this notion of a crony contest, sort of like another version of what Nick has done with his wonderful website to publicize this issue and to get people involved. So what we did, and this was especially the idea of Aaron Day, sitting right there, so you can thank Aaron for it, was the notion that what we're going to do is have a contest. This will get people engaged. And so what we did was we set up a website. We basically invited anybody to submit who is your favorite crony. We set up guidelines. David Kelly worked with some of the other advisors on putting together these guidelines. What is a crony? What's the difference between a crony and a legitimate person who's just dealing with the government? These are things that still have to be worked out. So we came up with the guidelines. We put them up there. We got over 300 submissions just putting up that website. Every kind of imaginable individual, corporation, etc. I spent quite a lot of time going through each of these 300 write-ups. Many of them had links. Most of them had links, actually, to articles to read about. I sorted through those. I got rid of the duplicates. There were a lot of duplicates. George Soros had a lot of duplicates. There are a lot of people who, got many, many nominations. But we just took the first nomination, the first person to nominate is the official nomination. And some of them weren't crony examples. They were just examples of crooks and normal criminal politicians, which is a little bit different from being a crony. That's a particular type of criminal and politician. So I went through those, and we ended up with about 100, I think it was 135-ish, something like that, finalists. And what we did was we had a primary. We posted those on the website, and we invited people to vote. So we did the primary, and then what we did was we came up with finalists in 4 categories. The interesting thing, by the way, about this contest is that it cuts across ideological lines. When you ask the question about how do you appeal to different audiences, and, assuming that, we want them all to read Atlas Shrugged and become objectivists, but of course, sometimes they don't do that, believe it or not. I know it's hard for you to believe, but so we're trying to come up with other ways. And something like this cut across ideological lines, because when you think about it, the Occupy Wall Street people, in many cases for good reasons as well as bad reasons, don't like the crony system either. They don't like the notion that there are privileged bankers, privileged corporations that are getting big handouts. Neither do the Students for Liberty. Neither do most libertarian groups. So this is something that had a cross-cutting ideological appeal. So anyway, we did the primary. We came up with 6 finalists in 4 categories. And then we went ahead and did the final count. Let me see if I have my glasses here so I can actually read the final. Pardon? Or 12, well, we had 4 categories and 3 finalists in each category. So, sorry. We got those together. Now, by the way, we actually had two awards. We had the Hunter and the Gatherer Awards because we used to be hunter and gatherers. So the Gatherer Awards were those that submitted the most number of valid nominations. And we had the finalists here. It was actually a close vote. And the names may not mean anything to you, though we will, of course, notify the winners. We had a woman named Holly Frazier who managed to submit 14 nominations that were in the finalists. We had a guy, George Hoyt, who managed to get 15 that were in the finals. But the winner was Jacob Olson, who submitted 16 valid entries. And so we will notify Jacob that he is the winner of the Gatherer. Okay, so what about the Hunter? Who's the winner? Well, we had 4 categories, as I said, and I'm going to go over each of the categories. The first category was which crony corporation or sort of non-governmental entity was the worst. And I'll give you the 3 nominations, the 3 finalists, and the order that they were voted on. The third place winner was the Federal Reserve. I think a worthy winner, of course. In the private corporation or category, the AFL-CIO came in number 2. Okay, but the winner in this category of a private corporation or non-governmental entity was AARP. AARP. So, okay. What about individual cronies in the private sector? Well, we had 3 finalists. The third place for that one was Sheldon Adelson. Now, I don't know if you know who he is. He's a Las Vegas business guy who owns casinos and operates casinos. But guess what? He doesn't like online gambling. I wonder why. A casino, could it be for moral reasons? I don't think so. Anyway, he's a bigwig and throwing money to Republican candidates and suborning them and so forth. So he came in number 3. Number 2, well, this guy got a lot of nominations, but he came in number 2, was Warren Buffett. So let's hear it for Warren. But in the category of crony individuals, the winner was George Soros. Yay. Well-deserved winner, well-deserved winner. Okay, what about crony politicians? Now, there's a competition for you. I mean, could probably nominate the whole damn Congress, okay? But, and the Senate, and a whole bunch of, but anyway, and there, I mean, that was a tough one too. But the third place winner, this is politicians who suborn the cronies and who empower the cronies. Number 3 was John Boehner, the Republican. See, this cuts across party lines. This is not Republican or Democrat. Okay, number 2, you'll be happy to know, was Harry Reid. Harry Reid. And you can read all about, by the way, you can go to the website and you can read the descriptions, you can look at the links, we got all the stuff out there. Any of you from these states can call into your local paper and say, hey, guess what, our guy won, wow. But the politician in office even today, who turned out to be the biggest crony was, no surprise here, Barack Hussein Obama. Yay. We come to the final category now. This is the government entity or agency that most facilitates and suborns the crony system. Number 3, the Export-Import Bank, a worthy winner, number 3 place. And again, Elizabeth Warren, a friend of the people, a friend of the little man and the little woman, is a big supporter of the XM Bank. No cronyism there. Number 2, another worthy winner was Fannie Mae. And after all, look at the wonderful job they did with housing and the housing market. And I mean, you know, there it is, untold misery on the American people. The winner in this category of government entity, suborning owners, and this is the final winner. These are the guys who get the $1,000 prize, or the person who nominated it. The person, by the way, who did the nomination was Holly Frazier, who came in 3rd for the Crony Gatherer. Holly won because she nominated the IRS. The IRS. Now, I want to finish off, and by the way, the winners gets a $1,000 prize for submitting this. So we believe in profits and money and good things like that. But I want to finish off, and then Aaron can say a few closing words. This was a great way, and I forget how many votes. By the way, that we had for the finalists, we had let's see, I think we had 1,800 votes and 1,835 votes for the IRS, and you can go down and you can look at how many people voted. So we had a lot of participation, and that was part of the goal, is to get people interested, to get people engaged, to bring this beyond the people in this room who pretty much agree with this. The good news is that this is not just a one-shot deal, and well, isn't that fun, wasn't that fun, and it really was fun. We're going to be building on this. Part of advocacy with the Atlas Society is not just making theoretical arguments. It's taking those theoretical arguments and operationalizing them. I like to quote Steve Jobs, who said what he wanted to do was make a dent in the universe. That is what we want to do. I personally, and certainly Aaron and the folks who work at the Atlas Society on these issues, we're not satisfied with just pronouncing the truth. We want to make a true and a better world. We want to go out there and bring those ideas out there and change the world. This is one of the ways we're doing it in a new way, and we're going to be following up with some interesting and innovative approaches to both the Crony contest and outreach to different target audiences and so forth. So anyway, those are the winners for tonight. I want to thank you all for your support of the Atlas Society. I think we're going to let Aaron say a few final words. Aaron, take over.
Thank you, Ed. So the good news is, overall, 5,000 people actually participated in this contest. So 50 times the size of this room. So we really did get quite a bit of engagement. And moving forward, I think there's a real opportunity for 2016 to perhaps identify which of the presidential candidates is the most crony. So change it a little bit. Instead of being what's the worst case of cronyism, which particular politician has aggregated the worst collection of crony action and activity. So that's the good news. And you're already starting to see in political debates, Carly Fiorina and others have started to bring up cronyism as a top political issue. So this really is a fundamental area where we can have impact and shape the political debate. The bad news is you're all probably going to get audited, and we're going to lose our 501c3 status because the IRS won. But nevertheless, this is just our first try. We'll see what we can do next year. So with that, thank you, and hope you enjoyed the program.